It is my great pleasure to introduce Jack Cumming.
Thank you very much, Faye. I'm going to ask your indulgence a little bit. I feel like a youngster in his 40s. I remember when I was in my 40s, I got a new job in a company and I had to speak to the board of directors, and they had me stand at a podium like this, and the distance wasn't quite right for my glasses, so for my eyes, so I couldn't read the notes. It was I had wound up pulling a Rick Perry and kind of winging it. So this is a repeat. Hi, Peter. I didn't realize you were here. But anyway, this last Tuesday, how many of you have had your cataracts done? We got more people have had their cataracts done than have been living in retirement homes. So I had my operation on Tuesday and on one eye. So we have to wait for the other eye. So now I'm a slave to drugstore glasses. So I'm going to be using these. Now what I'd like to do today, see if these will stay up here. I've got a handout here that you can be passing around. We won't get to it for quite a while, but I'll just start these going around. Yeah, just take one. And I gave this talk once before, and there was quite a bit of interest. You know, the discussion went on and on, so I realized there's a lot of interest. Today, there's quite a large group here, so there seems to be a great deal of interest in this topic. So I'm taking the liberty of filming it, and if it comes out okay, we'll find out later, we'll make it available on the website that you'll find at the end of this handout at the National Association of Continuing Care Residents Associations Learning Center website. We call it NACRA, for National Continuing Care Residents Association, and it's NACRA-U for Learning Center. It would be presumptuous to call it a university, but it's moving that direction. First, I want to thank Faye for arranging this, and I'm going to suggest that I really wanted to see this as a conversation, but I think it's best, based on my experience from the last time, to go through the material rather quickly. There's a great deal of material, and then open it up for questions so that everything gets covered sort of uniformly, and you have a sense of making a decision, because this is really about making a choice about how you want to live your life. We're all going to face the transitions that are ahead. We all know that. And the question is, what is the lifestyle that will allow you to have the most fulfilling life during the years that are remaining to you? Now, maybe with the Hemlock Society, I'm not sure. That may be fewer years than otherwise, but I think you're planning to mess up all our actuarial statistics. But first, I've got a couple of questions. How many of you are over 60? All right. Well, you're eligible. How many of those of you over 60 are still living in the same home you were living in when you were 60? Fewer people. How many of you have long-term care insurance? Fewer people still, but quite a few, actually. Of those with long-term care insurance, how many of you have partnership long-term care insurance? How many even know what partnership is? You do. Partnership long-term care. Partnership long-term care is a program sponsored by the state of California. It adds no cost to the cost of the long-term care insurance that allows you to protect your assets. You know, to qualify for Medicaid coverage for your long-term care costs, you have to spend your assets down to $2,000. But if you have partnership long-term care insurance, you only need to spend them down to $2,000 plus any benefits paid under the insurance. It was an effort by the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare to try to get people to provide privately for long-term care to reduce the burdens on the government. It's a positive thing, and I'm always surprised that very few people seem to know about the partnership plan or even what it does. How many of you live near your children? Not as many as I would have thought. I know I don't. How many of those of you living near your children expect your children to provide help when you need it? Oh, okay. Well, we got it. How many of you plan to live in an independent home for the rest of your days and never move to a CCRC, assisted living, or nursing facility? That's a gamble. That's a gamble. You're not sure. You can't know. So the fundamentals come out. We're all going to age. Aging does not end well. We want that final transition to be as natural, as comfortable, and as meaningful as possible. We have a lot of living to do between now and life's end. And today's question is, what can make those remaining years fulfilling for us? And that question is not trivial. Some people are very comfortable living alone. Some people are not and need more social support. And I'll speak specifically that my wife and I are differ in that, and we didn't really realize it until we were well into this. What would you do if you were alone and something went wrong? You know, you need to plan for this sort of thing, particularly people are. We're all of an age where things can happen anytime. You never know. The paramedics went by while we were eating lunch. Well, he walked by while we were eating lunch, but we were eating in a sidewalk cafe. It's always happening. And there are two fundamental options for the years of aging. One is congregate living, moving to a retirement community or some kind of similar congregate community, or aging in place, which typically means you stay living in the house that you're living in. But we've already found that about half the people here are not now living in the same home they were in when they were 60. So we're going to move around anyway. So the question is really, do you move to a community that's like a retirement community, or do you stay part of the general population, and how do you deal with the challenges of aging if you do that? There are a number of support services for people who stay in their homes. The home can be outfitted with rails and stair lifts, and there are design firms that specialize in it. There are home care outfits like Home Instead. You may be familiar with them, and others. I don't mean to tout any one, that's the one that I remember. Many people wind up hiring personal caregivers. And that's an interesting phenomenon. I'm not sure how that works. I see some of them are very nice people, but I'm not quite sure how you're sure that the person you've hired to be in this intimate role is really somebody you fully trust. There is medication management technology. It's somewhat limited. GE has a product. I looked at it. Well, anyway, you can evaluate that for yourself. And there's communication, there's Skype, there's all sorts of things. The problem with technology is that many seniors simply aren't comfortable with change and new things, and technology is new. And a lot of seniors, how many of you regularly use computers? You know, about 2/3 maybe. And then there's the village movement. This started in Boston. I was just talking earlier to a lady who's from Boston, but anyway, the Beacon Hill Village began a program. They have annual membership fee, $640 for an individual, $890 for a household, and they'll provide services to older people who feel that they need some assistance with the activities of daily living, like having your dog walked, the cat fed, the mail brought in, dinner delivered. They'll make sure there's groceries in the kitchen. They have a massage therapist. They'll weed your garden. that sort of thing. Range for doctors, plumbers, tax experts. And an example is Staying Put New Canaan. That seems to be one of the most developed in the city of New Canaan, Connecticut. Most developed programs, it's very active there, and it's called Staying Put New Canaan. I guess if you can afford to live in New Canaan, you want to stay put because it's pretty nice living. And they have activities like here on November 15th at 3 p.m. You can go here. New Canaan meets the Cuban Missile Crisis. They've got all sorts of things. There's a village-to-village network. This village movement is spreading, and you can join it and get help, and they're spreading rapidly. But they don't work well if things fall apart altogether. Are you having trouble hearing, or do you have a question?
No.
Could you hold your
There's
question?
an article about that in today's paper.
Okay. She says there's an article in today's paper about the village movement.
And they're including 3 in the San Diego County.
Okay. Thank you. But anyway, the difficulty with that is they're good for people under 80. But people over 80 start having real challenges. They need emergency assistance. They may have trouble walking. All sorts of problems begin to develop. And the village movement falls apart then, and it may be too late to consider other alternatives. For less affluent seniors, there's the PACE program. PACE stands for Program of All-Inclusive Care for the Elderly. I wish it really were all-inclusive. It's not. You still have to have your own doctors and everything. There's no truly all-inclusive program for the elderly. St. Paul's PACE here in San Diego, for instance, includes transportation, medications, home care services, occupational therapy, senior day center, and it's paid for by Medicaid. So it's for people who qualify for Medicaid primarily. There are many emerging support programs and services. Some are mission-driven, some are profit-driven, and to support elders staying in their own home. But eventually, people reach the point where they become fully dependent on others, and that's where the challenges of staying in your own home long-term begin. The core truth comes home to haunt us now, and the core truth is aging will happen regardless of where you live. So the alternative is congregate living. And let me tell you a personal story of my parents' generation. I'll start with my mother. My mother, after my father died, she felt lonely. I lived in New York City then. She lived in the New Jersey suburbs. And for a few weeks I would drive out to see her. But she then wanted me to drive out every week and mow the lawn because her husband was gone. And she insisted that she had to stay in a house. She couldn't move to an apartment. Well, I lived in New York City in an apartment because I didn't want to mow a lawn. And so that didn't seem like a proper bargain, and I certainly wasn't going to drive out there in the snow to shovel snow. So she eventually arranged for somebody else to come in and do all this, and she stayed in that home until she had a mild stroke and she was hospitalized, and they insisted that she then go to a skilled nursing facility for short-term rehabilitation after the stroke. And she lost all self-confidence in her ability to live on her own. She spent the remaining 12 years of her life, 12 years, living in a nursing home. And during that time, the people who chose to live in nursing homes became more and more needing of care. So she really wound up with nobody to talk to. It was a very lonely life. Then there was my uncle and aunt. And I tried to encourage them to move to a community. They lived in Nutley, New Jersey, those of you who are from the East Coast. And they had a house, and my uncle said, well, we'd love to move to a place. He had some places picked out that he thought would be nice to move to, but we can't afford to do it because we could never sell our house because we need a new roof. So I got arranged with a local roofer to come in and put a roof on their house, and they got the new roof. And at that point, my uncle said, gee, now we don't need to move now that we have this wonderful new roof. So the neighbors noticed papers piling up eventually, called the police, and the police came in, and they were both lying on the living room floor, unable to get up. They were simply dehydrated. They'd been there for days, nobody knows how, but you can apparently get very weak from dehydration. They were able to revive them, and then Adult Protective Services intervened and took them to the place that Adult Protective Services takes such people. And if you don't mind being called, have people say, "It's time for your orange juice, dearie," you'd be happy there. But I don't think that was a good thing. Then there was my in-laws, Valerie's parents, who's sitting here. And they decided that they wanted to move to a new community in New Hampshire called Rivermead. Well, we were skeptical about it, but they were adamant, and they moved there and moved into a bungalow. They're a very fancy place. And we went to visit them. A lot of people from Brown. It was mostly, being in New Hampshire, it was mostly Dartmouth, Yale, Brown, that kind of group. But anyway, what a beautiful place. So we thought, God, this is a really nice way to age. And so we decided then to be thinking about doing that. I think that's a new way of thinking. People are beginning to see these things, because what I hear among most people who are now in their 80s, they all say, we're not ready for that yet. Talking about a continuing care retirement community, when you move in while you're still active and able to live reasonably independent when your eyes are working, as Valerie and I do, but the care is there when you need it. So congregate living can be a lot like going back to college. If you put it off, it's a lot like going to elementary school. I don't know how else to put it, but you can choose between luxury communities and charity communities. There's all sorts of options available. And there are for-profit and non-profit communities. And Faye was asking me before the meeting started whether non-profit is inherently better than for-profit. And I can tell you that it's not. From what I can see, there are non-profit charities. There are things that we support with our contributions. And then there are nonprofit businesses that are just like any other business. They're making money, they're making profits, they're paying their executives well. The CEO of Kaiser Healthcare makes $6 million a year. $6 million a year, so they're doing quite well. They just don't pay their share of the community's expenses in the form of taxes. That's my view of that. So to answer your question, people inherently tend to trust nonprofits more than they trust for-profits. I fail to see the difference, and if the community I live in is a nonprofit, and but I worked in the for-profit industry all my career, and well, anyway, people are people, regardless of where they work. Some are venal, some are caring, some are altruistic, some are looking out for number one. The one challenge I think that the continuing care retirement community, you're all familiar with that term, continuing care retirement community, CCRC. Is there anybody here who's not familiar with the term? Okay, I'm going to call it CCRCs. These are communities that have 3 or 4 stages on their campus where they can accommodate you. You come in with independent living, you get to eat your meals, better meals if you're in a luxury place, adequate meals if you're in another not so luxury place, and some serve meals like the senior center lunch, which is okay and nutritious and fills you up, but may not be what you'd want every day. And then they have assisted living for people who just need a little care. And then typically there's a skilled nursing facility for people who need 24-hour-a-day nursing care. And sadly, there are people who need that. And I do sympathize with I haven't thought through whether I agree with the Hemlock approach or not, but I certainly see people who just suffer terribly for years after something, and it's a tremendous social problem. There are several aspects to evaluating a community, but let's look at 3 of them. First is location and lifestyle. If this is a place where you're going to live for the rest of your life, you want to be sure that you're picking a place that you'd like to live, so that's an important thing. So if it's in a poor part of town, and you wouldn't be happy going out on the street around there, I'd stay away from it. Second, you have to ask yourself, can I afford it? And that's a real question, because if you're cashing in your home and using the value that's in your home to pay an entrance fee that really is like a rental payment and gives you no rights other than the rights of a tenant, and in some states, New Jersey, the state Supreme Court ruled that CCRC residents don't even have the rights of tenants. They're not protected by landlord-tenant law. You might want to think twice about that. So that's an area to ask questions. There are a few communities that offer ownership, that operate like a cooperative apartment in New York City. I lived in a co-op in New York. Those of you who are from New York know how those co-ops work. And that can be a good model, but the industry has not widely adopted it. They viewed it as a charitable service, I believe. It grew out of their charitable intent, and they got a revenue ruling that ruled that caring for the elderly in and of itself is charitable. So that allowed them to have communities that serve the wealthy, that require you to demonstrate your wealth before you move in. You have to prove that you're wealthy to move in. You pay a large amount, and you get tax exemption. Not a bad deal. And the last aspect to evaluate is the financial stewardship by the provider. And now we get to this sheet that I've given you, because I've outlined on there a number of options. On the one side are various options that you're likely to encounter, and you want to be able to evaluate them. Some communities, I don't think I kept a copy for myself. Thank you. Some communities will give you a full refund of your entrance fee when you die. Or they may, here's a typical one that I'll use the example of the community that I live in. They'll let you can either have what they call a declining balance refund, where the entrance fee you pay is subject to refund, but the amount of the refund starts at 90% and then drops 2% a month, so that after 6 years, your entrance fee that you paid is now theirs fully. Or you can pay more and have an entrance fee that's 90% refundable when you die or if you leave, but they charge twice as much for that. Now, you don't have to be an actuary to figure out that if you take that double entrance fee payment, might be $500,000, and invest it, you're likely to come out with more money than investing in that death benefit, and that's what most people do. So that gives the provider the right to use that money as they see fit. So you can look at the communities by their refund provision, and that's what we have here across the top. And then coming down the left-hand side are the kind of long-term care provisions. I put down here type AAA. There's no community that offers full care. There's no, ideally, you'd move in, they'd take care of all your medical, your hospital, anything you needed would be included to be cared for the rest of your life, and you could live a carefree existence and spend the rest of your lives helping to mentor your grandchildren and making them into wonderful citizens. That would be a very nice thing to do. Nobody offers that. A type A community is like Casa de las Campañas. They offer that if you require care in assisted living or the nursing facility, you pay no more than what you would pay in independent living, except for the difference in the number of meals you get per day, and that's relatively trivial. That's called a type A contract. The terminology here was developed by the industry and to describe these things. The community that we live in is a type C. We pay an entrance fee, we pay a monthly fee, but if we go to the care center, we pay the full cost with a minor discount. We get 6% discount. They don't have to pay for marketing. And finally, there are communities like Casa Manana, which is a straight rental. Wesley Palms is a straight rental. Finally, you want to check out what the facility is able to provide under its license. Many of them say, we're not licensed to provide memory care. So if you get to the point where you need memory care, in their judgment, they can move you to another facility to get memory care, and you lose all the benefits that you had invested in the community where you were. So that's something to be very important. We've had residents who suddenly disappeared, and we said, what happened to them? Well, it turns out they needed care that wasn't included in the facility's license. On the backside, if you want to compare the cost among a community that provides the full care, the contract, the type A kind of contract, with one that does type C, this is the monthly value of long-term care by age for a person who doesn't need it at the time. In other words, at age 98 or 100 there, where it gets up to be $6,000 a month, you have a very high probability you're going to need some long-term care before the end of your life. It runs typically around $9,000 a month to provide that if you pay for it out of your own pocket. If you don't pay for it out of your own pocket, then you have to be impoverished and you have to subsist on what Medicaid provides, and that's a lower level of care than what you might opt for. And so if you want more information on that, it gives a website there. Well, moving along, my nose has been running. I apologize. Probably related to my eye being gouged there earlier this week. I don't know. So I apologize for that.
Can you give the website for long-term care?
Pardon?
Can you give the website?
The website that I gave is the Learning Center for the National Continuing Care Residents Association.
Right, but how about the long-term care?
You mean where to buy it?
Excuse me?
I don't have it. I don't.
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you said you had a website for long-term care.
There are many websites for long-term care, but I don't have one that I would particularly recommend. Now, that gets to the issue of financial stewardship. The options that you see listed on that handout, any provider could offer all of those options to people moving in at the option of the individual if the community's employed actuaries to help with their pricing. And there are ways that they could reinsure that risk so they wouldn't even have to take the risk. They don't do it. I think it's because of their origins in the church. They believe that pastoral thinking is all that's needed, and you don't need this kind of business sense. So typically, the kind of contract you get is determined by the community instead of by what your needs are. So in this area, Casa de la Campañas, Mount McGill Covenant Village, they provide full coverage programs because they felt that that was morally desirable. Secondly, you can see whether the organization is mission-driven or executive-driven by looking at their 990 form. Some CEOs make millions of dollars a year. So some of them are using resident monies to feather their own nests. They do that because of a section in the tax code called 4958. 4958 holds that there are dire penalties if a nonprofit organization pays excess compensation to its officers. If they do, they have to refund the money, pay a penalty of 200%. There are all sorts of penalties like that. So the nonprofit industry got their lobby together and lobbied the IRS, and the IRS issued a ruling saying, we'll give you a safe harbor. If you hire compensation experts, and if you have only the outside directors on your board serve on the compensation committee, and if the outside experts you hire say that compensation for people with responsibilities comparable to yours are at such and such a level, then you won't be subject to those penalties. So they will hire these firms. Those firms see their motive as increasing the compensation of the executive. They know they work for the executive. So you want to look at those incomes. A fair income for a CEO of a multi-facility place is $300,000 to $400,000. Most people you can establish a hierarchy of incomes that get you adequate people managing the place for that kind of money. If you're seeing money larger than that, chances are the outfit is being run for the executives rather than for the benefit of the residents. And you can also look at these whether they offer you financially equivalent options or just things like I told you where they just double the price and say, well, you can have that, but it's double the price. You know, obviously somebody just made that up. Ideally, they would price to contract fulfillment versus pricing to the market. My experience is that if you ask them, most say, we price to the market. We look at what the competitors are charging, and we price accordingly. What they should be doing is looking at the commitments that they're making to the residents and pricing to be sure that the money will be there to meet it. It was that kind of pricing to the market that got Pacific Homes in trouble some years ago. Pacific Homes was, they had, I guess, Wesley Pons, Casa Manana, some others. It was run by Methodists, and they had very low entrance fees. But for the people who paid them, the entrance fee was substantial. And the place went bankrupt. What they did was, when they started running out of money, they started opening new communities so they could get more entrance fees to take care of the people who moved in earlier. And it became kind of a rolling Ponzi scheme, and eventually it went bust. That kind of thing is not dead in this industry. This industry is very weakly regulated. So this leaves us to some conclusions. Whether to live alone or in a community should be a matter of personal choice. Some might disagree with that. Some might say there are socially compelling reasons why people should have to live in communities. For example, is it irresponsible to live alone and depend on the police to check on you? Should the community have to pay police to come in and check on people? That's a question. Or paramedics to respond to falls like the dehydration that I talked about. Or adult protective services to come to the rescue. But in general, I think it should be a matter of personal choice how you live. We're all human beings. We have choice. We take responsibility for the choices we made. Is it excessively indulgent to live in luxury? Some people are worried about what they feel they owe their children. And so they deprive themselves for the sake of their children. Often the children are more successful than they are, but I've seen that so much. And communal living today comes with a sacrifice of some autonomy. Community activities can be demeaning if art and basket weaving are acceptable, but wanting to understand community finances and decision processes are not. That can be a problem. And for many providers, they feel very threatened if residents want to ask too many questions about their management, their compensation determination practices, that sort of thing. The lack of effective regulation leaves communal residents subject to risk. Now, California has passed a myriad of laws regulating CCRCs. The regulation, the enforcement of those laws is left to a small group, the Continuing Care Contracts Branch, which has, I believe, 8 employees. It's part of the Department of Social Services, which has 5,000 employees, and it gets attention commensurate with its small size, and they simply don't enforce the rules. So for example, there's a law that residents are to be included in the budget process every year. So that determines whether our rates go up or not. Well, didn't happen this year. What do you do about that? Well, there's no way to really enforce the law. So you're taking a risk. Is it risky? Yes, there's a risk. California has extensive statutes, but weak enforcement. So with all these challenges, why would anyone choose communal living? Well, we did. Our reason was to choose communal, and I would do it again. We have a provider that many see as less than ideal. I hope that we can get that changed. I'd like to shame them into rising to their mission. I'd like to shame the regulators into regulating the industry and bringing it up to all that it could be. But I do like living with my fellow residents. We have the most wonderful dinner time conversations. The communal uplift, the support of that community is tremendous. And that's a huge thing for us. Now, we can move into the question part. Let me start with some questions that Faye gave me. Faye gave me a very good set of questions. First, she said, for-profit versus not-for-profit. I don't see any difference. I think people can be good people if they're executives in for-profit, and they can be greedy people if they work in nonprofits as executives. So I really don't see a difference there. The difference is whether the community contributes to in the payment of taxes or not. Nonprofit businesses are simply tax exempt. And that's determined by arbitrary rulings by the Internal Revenue Service as much as anything. They're not even so much in the tax code. You know, it was strictly a revenue ruling by staff in the Internal Revenue Service that led to this industry having tax exemption to provide luxury communities. She asked about buying versus renting or somewhere in between. If you're buying in, if you're paying an entrance fee, be sure you can afford to pay it, and be sure you know what they're going to do with that money. And I can promise you that it'll be hard to get them to tell you what they do with the money. But that money should be safeguarded for you. It should be benefiting you. You're paying that money in anticipation that it'll be used to fulfill the contractual promises that they're making to you, not to pay salaries to executives. So that's something to consider. The next thing she has is the continuing care communities versus just independent living or assisted living. I guess that means, is it important to have skilled nursing available? And I'd say it is. When people go through transitions, we have a lot of people who go up into the nursing care area for 5 days or 10 days. Sometimes as you get up into your 90s, there come times when you simply need additional care and you're not able to provide it for yourself, and you need more than the minimal care that's available in assisted living. Yes, sir.
Now, when you buy into some place, it's like $250,000, or I don't know what it is. It's a very large amount. Versus paying rent in there. What are the real benefits? Because I've been in both kinds of facilities and I can't tell the difference. It seems like they're both doing pretty well. But because even when you buy in, you still pay rent.
Well, the buy-in is like a prepaid rent. So if the rent would, let's say the rent at Casa Mañana, which is a pure rental community, might be $8,000 a month for a couple. If you have a buy-in of, say, $400,000, it might cut your rent to $4,000. You can figure out the actuarial equivalency because that buy-in can be treated like an annuity, and you can see exactly how much rent it's providing toward the operating needs of the community. The industry doesn't do that, but it could be done.
Well, there are any more real benefits, though, than that money situation? I mean,
if you get a Type A contract that provides care, now you've got long-term care insurance that's far better than any long-term care insurance you can buy in the market. It's not capped. It pays whatever the need is, it really meets the need. Bear in mind that you're entering into a relationship of trust with the provider organization. So be sure that it's an organization that you can trust. But if you trust them, and if they honor that trust, then it can be a very powerful thing indeed. Okay.
Are we ready for the questions now, sir?
Yeah, we can, I'm working down your list, but I'll let them ask what they're interested in, then we'll go back on the list if we run out. I don't think we're gonna run out. Have I evaluated them all? Well, you can't get the information. They don't give out the information to let you make fair comparisons. I guess the best you could do would be to go through the Council on Accreditation. There's an accreditation council. It's called CARF CCAC. Let me see if I can remember what it was. CARF is the Council on Accrediting Rehabilitation Facilities, and CCAC was Continuing Care Accreditation Commission, and they merged, so they call themselves CARF CCAC. They accredit communities. Generally, if a community is accredited, you should be able to trust it. I mean, that it's financially sound. But they too are part of the industry. Their clientele are the people who pay them for the accreditation. So there's nothing like a Consumer Reports that evaluates the alternative communities. You're either accredited or not. They don't give out platinum ratings, gold ratings, and silver ratings like that, which would be very helpful if they did. Yes, ma'am.
And how often do the audience might?
Here, if you could be so kind, I'll run it back and forth, one side of the room to the other. And this lady is next, and then I'll come over. Who had just had was starting to say something there? Who was? I'll come to you next.
I just wonder how often do they reassess their accreditations? Or is it just one time and they're in?
No, I believe that they have to do it at least every 5 years. Some elect to be accredited every year. Some managements are eager to improve and to do an excellent job, and so they're more likely to want more frequent evaluation so that they can correct problems before they mushroom to become bigger. There's all kinds of levels of human consciousness among the providers in the industry.
Jack, I have a question. What about you pay in, you pay your entrance fee, and then they come up with all the other activities. You have to pay so much every month for other activities. I have a friend who moved into a place in La Jolla. She's got this terrible fee every month. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, there's a fee every month. We don't have a separate activities fee, but these things are not regulated. It's like any business. They're free to do whatever they want. If the airlines want to charge you for bags, they're free to charge you for bags. And it's up to you whether you want to pay those fees and fly on the airline or not. So it's a similar kind of thing. If it's done financially the way it should be, then there's a trade-off between the front-end fee you pay and the monthly fee you pay. Typically, the monthly fee includes your right to live in your apartment, some minimal care services, the right to the meals that you receive, and to participate in the activities. And am I forgetting anything?
Cleaning? Yeah, cleaning.
Cleaning, yes, cleaning. Cleaning has all the same problems of cleaning anywhere. So, if you know what I mean. Sometimes you'll find bleach on things you didn't expect to find it on.
Jack, you had told us in looking at the financial stewardship, kind of to evaluate that, you had mentioned that you look at commitment versus market-driven. What are some ways you can evaluate which side of that fence they sit on without living there?
I think the only thing to go by is reputation. I mean, when I made the move, I didn't know what I know now. I know now, for example, that Casa de la Campañas tends to involve its residents more, and be more resident-centered than are some of the other communities that are run by, other, but many of these groups are affiliated with religious organizations. People go there thinking, gosh, these must be honest people. They're Lutherans, or they're Methodists, or they're Jewish. The Covenant Retirement Community in Pennsylvania, which went bankrupt about a year or so ago, was started by B'nai B'rith. They just walked away from it and left the residents lost everything. So there's all sorts of misleading representation about the nature of the stewardship. So you simply have to probe. If they say they're Lutheran, ask them, will the Lutheran Church pony up if this place gets in financial trouble? I think you'll find out the answer will be no. Pacific Homes the residents sued the Methodist Church, because the Methodist Church had sponsored Pacific Homes. The Methodist Church had to come up with the money. They made a special assessment on their congregations to pay that settlement. After that, the communities, instead of providing for some sort of financial oversight that might have made that never happen again, chose instead to change their contracts so that there's no guarantee from the sponsoring religious organization. They took the guarantee out. And what happened with Pacific Homes? Well, they brought in a very capable manager who raised prices up enough so that they repaid the whole $25 million that had come from the Methodist churches that they'd been assessed for. And when the central body of the Methodist Church discussed what to do with that money, should they give it back to the churches that had contributed, they decided it was better to use it for central functions in the general mission of the church. You're dealing with human beings here.
Someone raised the question whether there is a difference between rental institutions and those where you pay up front, and I'm concerned about the same issue. I understand that in a purely rental place, they can kick you out if you cannot manage independently. You rent for independent living, and if you can't get to the meals, or if you can't get to the pool, or if you need somebody to help you walk around, they can simply ask you to leave.
It depends on how it is licensed. If it's simply an adult living community, an age 55 minimum age community, they have no obligation to provide care services, and it's no different from going on a cruise ship. And it's nice while you're there, but if you get sick, the cruise ship puts you off at the next port of call. It's a similar kind of thing. If they're licensed as a CCRC in California, they're generally required to meet all the requirements of a licensed residential care facility for the elderly, and that carries with it certain requirements. If they claim nonprofit status under Revenue Ruling 72-124, which is the revenue ruling that ruled that care for the aging was a charitable purpose, then they're required to maintain you in residency, even if all your assets are exhausted, provided you've not squandered the money. And some have maintained that hiring a personal caregiver, if they have care services available on the campus, can be deemed to be squandering the money. So you have to, and that again depends on the policy of the individual provider. You have to be very careful to pin them down on exactly what they mean. If they say, well, you can stay in residence even if your funds run out, say, do I void that if I take a cruise? Many say that you've now squandered your money.
I'm a resident of the Paradise Village in National City. This is a new facility that has a loose connection to the Seventh-day Adventist Church, in that the church is the owner of the land on which these are built. But from what I understand, the director of the facility has carte blanche to do what he wants to do with the facility. how he runs it, in other words. And if I start inquiring about his financial arrangements, I think I'm going to be politely told, mind my own business. So my question is there any kind of a governmental organization or any other kind of organization that I can use as a kind of a shelter to say, well, these people are inquiring, and I could go to them and ask them to develop that information?
There's no shelter. The providers, some providers are quite transparent. Fortunately, perhaps most providers are transparent and try to do the right thing and will listen and respect residents. But the head of the California Residents Association, because of his presidency in that organization, his provider tried to bring an action for eviction that he had to fight in the courts. There are a number of cases where residents are simply offered their money back if they've asked too many questions. So that becomes a problem area. That's something that needs to be addressed. My experience is that the Department of Social Services is strictly reactive and will not protect residents who get into trouble with their providers for having asked too many questions. You have to be very careful with that.
This is on a personal note. Since you and your spouse appear to be hale and hearty, what motivated you to move into that facility?
Well, I didn't want to leave her all alone if I died. My great-grandfather died at age 71. He was reading his Bible. I guess that gave him a quick trip. And my grandfather died exactly 40 years later to the day, on January 17, 1941. He was 72. My father died at age 72, so I figured I probably had a date stamped on my birth certificate that said age 72. I didn't want her to be alone. They all died of heart attacks. I'm happy to go that way. It seems like a good choice. But it didn't. I'm 75 now, so what happened? I outlived it. And I'll take that. I'm doing my best. But it's a very happy choice. You know, we're very happy with the community we live in. We're disappointed in the industry because the industry has failed to bring forward the kind of leadership needed to meet the kind of promise that's implicit in its origins in the faith community and in its commitment to caring for seniors in the difficult transitions of aging. That's a disappointment to us. But we're very happy with the community, and we're happy that it exists. And I believe that the mentality of the industry can be changed, but it just needs leadership. And it's very hard to find strong leaders in a nonprofit industry. That was something that surprised me. It just doesn't seem to attract the same caliber of leadership that you have in business generally.
Two points. My understanding is that with the Pacific Homes situation, when people bought in many years ago, they were promised that their monthly fee would never go up. And I have heard people say and complain about the fact that the homes raise their fees each year, but I wouldn't move into one that promised not to raise the fee. We have inflation. They are buying food and services. It's a heavy service industry. And if they promised they would never raise the fee, 10 years from now, the services would be nil because of inflation. You're living in your home and you're dealing with inflation. So that's one point. That I don't think was the major thing that did Pacific Homes in. They promised to care for these people and never raise it. The other thing is I looked at some of the type A that promise continuing care for the rest of your life. And I looked at their pricing. The model can be appealing if you are with one that's managing the money well. But their pricing, it seemed to me, when I looked at if a couple moved in and they pay the $500,000 to move in. Very little more than a single person moving in who pays $500,000 to move into the same apartment. But they're promising long-term care, and long-term care insurance is expensive. They're promising long-term care for 2 people, but they're charging very little extra for 2 people versus 1 person. And my feeling was that it's the single people that are really being cheated, if you will. If they were going to actually take a look at the potential costs of that couple for the rest of their lives versus 1 person, the differential they're charging is not fair.
The industry has not liked to employ actuaries. And I don't know whether how many of you know what actuaries do, but you work with numbers and business judgment and that sort of thing, and our profession evolved after there were scandals in the life insurance industry in the early years of the 20th century, and they needed somebody to make sure insurance companies were operated on a sound and fair basis, and so we tend to establish reserves to make sure that contracts can be fulfilled fairly. The CCRC industry feels that actuaries cost too much money, and they've chosen not to employ them. There are exceptions. University Village, Hyatt's, whatever. What does Hyatt call themselves now? V. Okay, V. There's another group that changed their name to B. I don't know what these people think, but anyway, V. They do have actuarial pricing, and you pay an extra entrance fee for the second persons.
But that was the one that I did an in-depth analysis on, and the extra fee for the second person didn't nearly cover when I talked to an insurance person selling long-term care insurance. Said, what would this cost, et cetera.
Well, there's a difference between a salesman for insurance and an actuary. The salesman makes his money on a commission. So roughly 50% of what you pay for long-term care insurance goes to pay the salesman who sells it. When you move into a community like V, you don't have to pay that salesman. They can do it net, and they do it net. So if you take the discounted value of the $80,000 extra they charge for the entrance fee, plus a proportionate share of the monthly, and get what the discounted value is relative to the discounted value of long-term care, the pure care, not the cost of having an agent sell it to you and make you feel like you're an important person, you come out even.
I hesitate to bring this up, but we talked about the couple, the Rudolphs, who were in a long-term care facility in Albuquerque, 90 and 92 years old, beginning to have dementia, etc., decided to stop eating and drinking and were kicked out of the facility. They finally died because their son rented a house for them, stayed with them for the 11 days that they needed to die. And this has caused a big stir that they can't die in their own home. They could if they were really in their own home and not in the CCRC. Just wondered if you have any comments or have heard anything in the industry about this kind of thing?
Well, I haven't, but the facilities are licensed as residential care facilities for the elderly. As such, they're subject to regulatory oversight, and the oversight of the health and safety aspect of it is much more vigorous than is the financial oversight. And so that kind of thing would not be permitted until it's legislatively permitted. That would just be my guess. And our society has not evolved so far as to allow that level of choice. And I think we're afraid that, I know every time I have a new ache or pain, I think, gosh, is it worthwhile going on? And you lie there in bed and you say, why me, God, and should I go on? And then you go through it, and then something wonderful happens, and you realize you're there for a reason to make a difference in somebody else's life. So it becomes very problematic. Now, clearly, for people whose life is significantly drawing to a close, people on hospice, that sort of thing, there's a real question there. My sense is that hospice care sometimes, a doctor friend of mine said, if I have a choice between prolonging life or relieving suffering, I relieve suffering. And I think that's a predominant principle that guides them. But it's not something we can speak about given the high rate of prosecution in our society and the love of going after people.
If you live in one of these facilities, can you be on hospice care as you can at home?
Yes, absolutely. I just lost a dear friend. I didn't realize how ill he was. And he came to me one day and he said, Jack, I'm on hospice. And I said, well, what is it? And he had leukemia. And apparently, if your blood reaches a point where there's a crossover threshold, you start going into decline. And he only lasted 2 weeks on hospice. It was a very beautiful passing. You know, they did work with him. They sustained him. They relieved any suffering, and I found it very moving.
Well, I wanted to ask them, that's a little bit...
Just a second here, I'll bring you the mic again. I guess I'm confused. Hospice doesn't require that a patient continue eating if they choose not to. So if they're in one of these facilities and a patient says, I don't want to eat anymore, what happens in that case?
I think that the facility, I'm not a lawyer, so, as a human being, they ought to keep them. I think this is outrageous that they were expelled. That facility should be given demerits or whatever they give them for doing such an atrocious thing. My own mother stopped eating, and they called it failure to thrive. And she just said she wouldn't let anything pass her lips anymore. I don't know what brought that about. You know, we went, we talked, I met with her, and that was her choice. Now, it may be that her digestion simply shut down, but you know, if there comes a time, and I think people often know when that time is, and we need to respect the dignity of living and the dignity of dying. They both should be, people should be allowed to keep their dignity under all circumstances. They shouldn't just be arbitrarily dislocated for no good reason.
I have a question, but this is just a comment prior to my question. They also have what they call palliative care, which is a diagnosis of terminal, but they take care of other things that you might want to have done and whatever before. If you have a living will, also, you outline exactly what you want done when you are unable to speak for yourself anymore. And feeding or non-feeding is also one of the options that they ask you if you do have a living will. My question is, I would like to know the name of the governing agency, that they are an agency only, a name only. You said they don't do any real evaluations. But I think that if we knew the name of the agency and we had an interest, we could do something in terms of pressuring them. I'm sure they don't want to hear things all the time from citizens that are saying, you need to take a look at this facility or whatever. They might just, you know, the squeaky wheel and all that. So I would like to know what the official name is again and how to contact.
The Continuing Care Contracts Branch of the Department of Social Services. The head of the branch is named Rodriguez, John Rodriguez. The chief counsel, who's the person who's been there the longest and who understands this the best, is a man named Bob Thompson. I think he's now near retirement. And the head of the Department of Social Services is Will Lightbourne, I believe. I want to call him Light Horse, but that's an Indian. I don't think he's Indian, but I think his name is Will Lightbourne. And you're welcome to contact anybody you wish. It's the Continuing Care Contracts Branch of the Department of Social Services.
Maybe, Faye, we could put this in the next newsletter that we send out, too. So if you didn't bring pencil and paper, you'll be able to have this information.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to make a difference, though. They say their funding is, they have no funding, we can't do anything. Yes?
My question is really a suggestion. Why don't you go to the governor, Jerry Brown, and go up there to Sacramento and meet with him and tell him what you're doing and what you're finding, and get him to get on board and get some action from him.
Well, I guess he's a contemporary of mine. Get me an appointment, I'll go talk to the man.
Jack, Consumers Reports did an evaluation of nursing homes a couple of years ago. Are you familiar with that?
No, I think I saw it, but I don't.
No, it was a very good issue on how to select one and how to evaluate one. And I'm assuming that the skilled nursing facility in the CCRC would be equivalent to a nursing home. But I wanted to ask you what the financial incentive is in a CCRC if you are in the skilled nursing facility. Would they be incentivized to keep you alive or sort of not? I want to.
They get paid for every day you live.
You pay for every day you live.
Yeah, so they get paid if you are alive. They do. Their income stops the day you die.
Now, what if one member of the couple is in the skilled nursing and the other one is independent living? Is that a profit-making thing for the facility?
Well, in a Type A community, that couple pays the same that they paid before they moved in. In a Type C community, the one who's living in independent living has to pay the full share of the independent living apartment, and the one in the skilled nursing facility pays that amount, so it can amount to $15,000 a month. A friend of mine is paying, his wife has had Alzheimer's for the last 13 years. He's lived there now for 13 years, and he pays $15,000 a month.
But in the CCRC, there is no change, and so the incentive would be not to necessarily prolong the life of the person, right?
Well, there are different types of CCRCs. Every CCRC, it sounds like there ought to be a uniform standard so that if somebody said this is a CCRC, you'd know what it was. But all it has to do is to provide a commitment, a multi-year commitment. Most of them provide lifetime commitment, but they don't have to. They can just say, we'll keep you for 5 years, and they qualify as a CCRC and have 3 levels of care. And then under California law, they're allowed to call themselves a CCRC.
I'm doing a parry.
Rescue Barbara, is there anyone who has a question, and then I'll go right back to her. Right back.
Oh yes, of course. Presumably, if you're going into a community of this kind, you would have an attorney look over the contract. Do the attorneys know enough about these things to make sense of a contract?
I know of no one who's gone to an attorney who's been told that it was a wise thing. This is a lifestyle that people choose. The contract. Our contract is that thick. And the contract is allowed to incorporate documents by reference. So the resident handbook is incorporated by reference. So it becomes part of the contract. But the provider who now offers this is called a contract of adhesion. You have to, it's take it or leave it. The resident moving in doesn't negotiate that contract. You accept it. And yet the provider has a unilateral right to change all the terms in the resident handbook, including introducing new fees. So, just as the airlines start charging for bags all of a sudden, they can decide they're going to start charging for vitamin B12 shots. That's happened in a case that I know of recently. And you'll be surprised how many people get vitamin B12 shots. I didn't realize that was a factor until I moved into a CCRC. Go ahead.
Point of clarification, Department of Social Services, federal?
No, that's California state.
Okay. And then are you aware of any of the type A facilities that would be associated with like a New York Life or any of the larger life insurance and long-term disability care providers where you would have that assurance?
No, none of them, none of these communities use reinsurance to cover the risk. They could easily do so. Many of the companies like New York Life, well, I don't know if New York Life is one, but long-term care providers use a firm in Woodland Hills called Life Care Assurance, which provides turnkey long-term care coverage for insurance companies. But they would also provide coverage for CCRCs. They provide reinsurance. I don't know whether you all are familiar with reinsurance. And reinsurance is insurance that an insurance company buys. So if I sell him a policy for $10 million and I can't afford to pay out $10 million, I'll turn around and buy another policy for $9 million at net rates. So that if he dies, I get $9 million from them and I'm only out $1 million. That's called reinsurance. And so Life Care Assurance is the major force providing those services for this industry.
I just wondered if you could clarify something for me. This relates to the type AAA, and you said that that's not offered. I was at a presentation recently at V, and if I understood them correctly, they were describing that they provide full medical care, because then I asked the question, based on them saying that, then what does that mean, that you don't need your long-term care? If you're there, and if you've been paying for long-term care, it sounded like, and they agreed, that you don't really need it there.
Yeah, but you still need your medical insurance. You still need Kaiser.
Right.
They're not doing the Kaiser part. The type AAA there would be, in lieu of Kaiser, everything would be taken care of. Your doctor would be there. Everything.
So I misunderstood what they were saying.
Yeah, now you've raised an interesting point, though, about the long-term care. Some people come to a type A community, they already have long-term care insurance. If you go to Kendall Corporation, which is the Quaker organization that operates a number of communities on the East Coast, you can assign your long-term care to them, the long-term care insurance that you have, and they'll reduce the amount you have to pay. Most of the communities in California do not do that. There's no reason why they can't. These are all things that they could do if they were willing to consider it, and the leadership were there to provide a truly resident-oriented program.
One announcement that Faye's going to be making here in just a couple minutes, so if you can just hold on, and we'll thank Jack for his wonderful presentation here too. Thank you so much.